And for everybody's information, we will be recording this presentation, so you'll be able to view it and share it after the fact. It'll probably take a day or two before we get it out there, but it'll be on our YouTube channel and on our social media and on our website. So we'll also send a link to everyone that participated or that registered during the for the presentation. And with that, Cindy, I'll hand it over to you and let you introduce, and we'll get going.
Thank you, Joe. As Joe said, he's part of our Alabama Trails Foundation team, as is DeForest Tuggle. She's an AmeriCorps Vista partner in Piedmont. Jerry Ainsworth is also with us here tonight, as is Jacob Richards. And I noticed that Logan Smith is online, and he is our not quite yet, but soon to be Vista partner in the southern part of the Pinhoti. So we're excited to have our team here tonight. Also saw a board member, Maggie Cunningham, is out there somewhere. So thank you, Maggie, for all your support. So as Joe said, we're here to talk about Jogloma-Scott Lake. It's a project we've been working on for the past couple years. As in most projects in life, there's a lot of twists and turns. We've learned some stuff and some very exciting new discoveries along the way. We've met some new people. We've said farewell to a few people who went on to other great career opportunities. So, but we're back and we're still working on this and hope for some announcements fairly soon. But tonight, one of the questions that has surfaced a lot over the summer is the cultural significance and the history of the area. And that is one of the, I think, the most interesting things that we, discoveries that we keep learning about is the deep history of Jogloma Lake and the family that created the site. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Katie. This is Katie Shakur, a recent addition to the University of Alabama Office of Archaeological Research. She, her husband, and brand new baby have just moved to Alabama. So we welcome her both to our team and to Alabama. So Katie, with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, and I will get out of the way for a great presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm really excited to be here and be part of this project. As Cindy said, I'm Katie Shakur. I've recently moved here from South Carolina, but I've kind of lived all over the South for the past 15 years or so. So I am a historical archaeologist and a heritage specialist, and I love to research the past, and I love to understand things about the past that we might not know from just reading a book. There's a lot of stories that aren't told in your history textbook or in a book you might find at a bookstore if it's just looking at the written word and like historical text. But as a historical archaeologist, I love to look at things that would complement and go beyond the written history. So I do a lot of archaeology. I do a lot of historical architecture to document the everyday person and go beyond the rich and famous, the elites of the world. So what I'm going to do today is talk about Lake Jogloma and Scott Lake, and also share some background about how we do this kind of research, why it takes so long to do archaeology and historical architecture, and the types of resources we look for, and the story we are able to create using different lines of evidence to learn about past communities. So first, what is archaeology? And excuse me if you already know this, but I just wanted everyone to be on the same page. But archaeology is studying past communities through what they left behind. It's often physical objects. It's places that they built and modifications to the landscape. And it's all about looking at what humans did, what we created, what we've modified, how we interact with our built environment, and how we continue to build the environment surrounding us. And again, we're focusing on the human experience and human histories. So in this case, we're looking at the Scott family and the incredible impact that they had in Alabama at Scott Lake, Lake Jogloma. And we investigate these human stories through physical traces of their activity. And I have some tools pictured here because we know that people build things, they build houses, they create dams to help support the life that they have. That's what is archaeology. But why do we do archaeology? Like I said before, we're learning about communities maybe not included in the written record, or maybe communities that didn't know how to write and read. And so they might not have documented their own history. There are a lot of communities that don't read or write, but live within a society that does have a lot of reading and writing. So you might have a landlord documenting certain things about an area, but the people who lived in that house or in that area might not have been included. Their voice might not have been heard. But if we look at the things they left behind, we can understand more about their life. Archaeology is really looking at people's trash and the built environment that they left behind. We're able to supplement the written record through archaeology and historical architecture. We have, the US is great at keeping tax records. So we can look at tax records to see who owned what property, who lived where, but we might not be able to capture the artistic talent that a person had in an area by just looking at the tax records. Part of archaeology is also complying with state and federal law. If you receive federal funding for a project, you have to make sure that you document archaeology that's out there. If it's something that's pretty significant, like Lake Jogloma, you're going to have to do a little extra work to document and really explore, what kind of changes you might be making to the built environment that past communities made. And we do that because we want to preserve the past for the future. And once you excavate something, once you dig something up from an archaeological perspective, you can't do it again. It's gone permanently, besides the written record that we leave behind as archaeologists and as heritage specialists. So we really want to take our time, document, and capture as much as we can about past communities for everyone around us, but also for future communities. So how do we do it? The process of archaeology does take some time, and that's because it first starts with background research. We do a lot of map searching. We go to libraries and archives and try and find as much as we can about a particular project, and sometimes that takes some time. We work with the Alabama Historic Commission a lot to understand different standing structures and to document it. And sometimes records go missing and they have to take some time to search on their end to find the record that we're looking for to complement the archaeology. There are libraries across the United States that will have documents. If we think farther back in time than Lake Jogloma, we might even have to go to, if we're doing a DeSoto and looking at early European contact in the United States, we're going to have to go over to Spain or elsewhere in Europe to kind of find those resources. Lots of things are online, but it takes a while to get that online library up and running. So the background research takes some time. Then we do survey. And in this picture here, my colleague Danielle is conducting, she's gathering research, a non-invasive type of survey, ground penetrating radar, to understand what's beneath the ground. And we'll do that because, like I said, once you excavate, you can't excavate again. Excavation is a destructive process. So people like Danielle at OAR will conduct this type of research, ground penetrating radar, to gather data that is not destructive. And then we might excavate, we might dig square units one by one, or we might have to excavate a lot larger to find aspects of the past through excavation and through the material culture that people left behind, like broken ceramics, metal, stone tools, wood objects, if we're so lucky that they've been preserved in the soil. But also the built environment and standing structures that may have toppled over and things like that. So we're all trying to document that kind of what past communities left. Then we process the data. And again, it's more than just artifacts. Processing historical documents could take a long time depending on the amount you have. Processing the ground penetrating radar, we have to run that through some programs to understand what those data are saying. Then we write the report, and then we submit and share our findings. So we submit our findings to the Alabama Historic Commission, or the U.S. Forest Service asks for our reports as well in certain instances. So it depends who is responsible for that land, who we submit the reports to. And then we also share it with other heritage specialists to make sure that, our tax dollars, because these programs are federally funded often, or if it's a grant from like the National Science Foundation, we want to share our findings with the people who fund it, and also show that we're doing good science and documenting past communities. Another aspect to our research is looking at the historic architecture. And so we have the Historic American Building Survey, the Historic American Engineering Record, and the Historic American Landscape Survey, the HABs, HARES, and HALS. And that's, the US has a program through the national parks to really document America's architectural heritage. And sometimes you might be looking at something like the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C., but other times you're really looking at unique and local architecture in an area, utilitarian and vernacular, the architecture of the everyday, and looking at those architectural and engineering techniques. And one of the reasons we love to document that is because people locally create such beautiful and have such wonderful artisanal skills and craft that we can document through architecture that might not be included in history, in the written text. So for example, when we get into Lake Jogloma, did Scott leave a record of how he built, writing about, how he chose different stones and the techniques to create the building? No, but we can look at the architecture left behind to understand his craftsmanship and the techniques he used to build these structures. And it's really a wonderful way of preserving the regional uniqueness that we have here in Alabama. And local practices in Alabama deserve to be preserved just as much as a Frank Lloyd Wright house or something like that. So that's what this project is, does a great job of helping the historical architecture and the built environment document what local people were doing at a really interesting time. And I'll get more into the time period. But so that's kind of the overview of what I do as an archaeologist and a heritage specialist. Now I want to get in a little bit to Lake Jogloma and the history of it. So here's a map just to orient where you are going. And I should say that these data that I'm presenting were brought together by a team of people at the Office of Archaeological Research at Alabama. I am joining midway through this project, and so people like Rose Pearson, who might be on the call, and some other staff at OAR really did so much of the work, and I'm presenting things that they did so much work in. So I want to give a shout out to them. And archaeology and heritage research is never done alone, because it's always a team of people coming together to pull things from different avenues of information all together. So here we have a star, just where the map is, and there's a tiny little red outline here. That's the survey area, because we actually did a survey of the area, and we completed some shovel tests, so some small excavations, just circular 30 centimeter diameter excavations to try and find out if there was more to the site than what we could see above ground and what was previously documented. So what we found through the research is that the state of Alabama, and we got this through the Bureau of Land Management documents, the state of Alabama obtained this land in June 1856, and they really intended to expand the railroad system. The 1800s, the mid 1800s was a time of great expansion for the railroads. That's how we were connecting different parts of the US and expanding our commercial practices. You could get things shipped to you, like a house from Sears Roebuck, and that was, a lot of that was going on in the railroad system. And so a lot of small towns in Alabama actually have railroad ties. They were founded maybe because a railroad depot and a railroad station were there, and they were integral to this larger infrastructure project happening in the United States. But with Lake Jogloma, no railroad was actually ever built in the area. So they thought about it, but they didn't actually build a railroad there. And we have that information based on the historic maps and the documents that it doesn't seem like Talladega County ever got a railroad here. So what did they do? Well, the county tax collector was like, okay, let's get rid of this land. We're not using it. Let's try and sell it. So they tried to sell the area in August 1931. So they owned it for quite a while, but no one bid enough money to cover the taxes. So the land was then turned over to the State Land Commission. And in 1945, the commissioner set the price at $59 to cover the back taxes. And it's crazy to think about, you know, this beautiful piece of land being sold for $59. Today, it would be significantly more. So we also like to contextualize the price of land, the cost of living at the time, and see change through time through things like a project like this, to see what the Scotts did and compare it to what people are doing today. It's fun, another fun project. So we have the background about Arthur C. Scott, also known as Offie. He was a mechanic living in Talladega, Alabama. And he purchased this property for $59 in May 1945. And here's a beautiful aerial view of Lake Jogloma from 1966. And Scott began to change the land. Again, he made those modifications to the land, the built environment, to make it a place where he and his family could spend a lot of time. So between 1946 and 1969, Offie built a dam, a bridge, a road, a lake, and 3 cottages. You know, so he was clearing trees, bringing building materials in, shaping stone so that they would work for the cabins that he wanted to build for his family. So he put a lot of effort into creating a recreation area in the mid-19th century, so that he and his family could take a break when they wanted to get out of the town and they wanted to spend some time in nature, just like we do today. You know, when we go hiking in the Talladega National Forest, it's great to get out of our towns and out of our cities to explore nature. But there's a constant human component to those things, like the trail. Humans are creating the trail, and we want to document that. And one of the questions we kept thinking about, especially the people who were on this project before me, kept thinking about is, you know, where did the name come from? Where did Jogloma come from? Because it's not one that, if you look at place names, you can do research on place names. It's not one that pops up. You know, you look for different origins and things like that, and it didn't have a particular linguistic origin for a language or, you know, an older place name that was anglicized by a local community. But what we remember is that Scott built the lake and the cabins for his family to spend there. And we know things about Scott because of birth records and tax records and bits in the newspaper. So, you know, we know he was a mechanic. We also know he was married to Willie Mae. And he, again, was thinking about his family during this. So he's like, okay, I'm going to think about Willie Mae when I'm creating this cabin and this space here. But I'm also going to think about, he had a daughter named Joyce. And he also had a daughter named Gloria, and he was thinking about how to spend family time at this lake. So he took a couple letters from his family's names, from his wife, from Joyce and Gloria's names, and came up with Jogloma. And I just think that's such a cute story. And, you know, Cindy told me that story. It's great to talk with people who are familiar with the family and to share these fun little tidbits that you wouldn't learn about if you just looked at the newspaper stories about Jogloma, or if you just looked at the tax records. So again, we like to pull different lines of evidence to understand things about this area, to understand what people were doing and why they did things. So we have the Scotts building this beautiful recreation area for themselves in the mid-19th century. And then we also have evidence in the newspapers of people going and visiting Mr. and Mrs. O.C. Scott at Lake Jogloma. So here you have Mr. and Mrs. Alfred Hickman and their children coming from Bessemer to visit the lake. You also have, you know, he advertised it as a place where you could go fishing. So he used it a lot for personal recreation, but it also seems like Offie Scott thought about having it be open to the public on certain days. And he had these advertisements in the newspaper saying, you know, you can come fish for $1. Now, it's not clear if that actually happened to a large extent or if he was just testing the waters with these little advertisements. But again, it was a recreation facility in the mid-19th century, and he was able to create these beautiful cabins and have this wonderful place for fishing and a retreat for his family to get out. And we do know that they lived there full-time part of the during some of their ownership of the area. So the Office of Archaeological Research at the University of Alabama went out and conducted some research. We did some shovel tests, like I explained, some small test excavations to see how big the extent of Scott's impact in this area was, documented some of what we see built there. And so this is this is a map that is from a report. You can see we get a lot of people contributing to reports by having map makers. Danielle is who is doing that GPR survey. She's a map maker for us, and a GIS specialist, a geographic information system specialist. And so she was doing this. And then we had a crew of a number of people out there digging all these little yellow dots are test excavations to see. And we do this systematically to see how big the Scott's impact was in this area. So down here are the three cabin spots, and then here's the lake. And we have negative shovel tests for this, meaning we did not find material culture or artifacts in those shovel tests. So we were able to kind of create a map that would delineate and describe the extent of this particular site. And we were also able to document some of the built architecture. You know, we have a standing wall here, some concrete steps. We measure the length and the degree of these standing stones and the remains of the cabin to then be able to understand how big the cabin was and trying to recreate it to the best of our abilities. And from there is where we can see the craftsmanship of O.C. Scott. I mean, this is an extremely nice wall here next to the concrete steps. And the fact that it's been preserved without someone maintaining it is quite remarkable. And so the integrity of the site's been altered because the structure has been left to deteriorate, but we can see how great of a craftspersonship and his artisanal skill to build these things really is through the remains. So we're learning about the family, we're learning about Scott, we're also learning about craft from the day, from the mid-19th or mid-20th century, the skills people had. And it's really remarkable that he was a mechanic by trade, but then also really interested in building this lake house for his family. And we might not know the skills and tools and you know, how he built it, but by looking at what's left behind and through oral tradition, we can understand more about the past community, more about Scott and the great skills he had to work with his hands and build things. We also have other remains of cabins, because again, there were 3 different cabins, and we went through and documented all of these, took pictures, measurements. Again, we're trying to document them to preserve the past for the future. And to learn about past communities that aren't documented in history books. Let's learn about them and share that really unique aspect of Alabama history with other people. So we also have a culvert, you know, as part of the dam. This culvert would have moved water because to keep water flowing. And this is an architectural feature we're actually going to have to document a little bit more, because again, it's significant that in the past we had this great architectural skill, this evidence of it, and we want to document it before it might break further because it's already broken and not working as intended. And we work with teams of like biologists and ecologists and engineers to understand, you know, why this isn't working and how is this impacting the local wildlife there. You know, are fish being harmed or hurt by this? Are reptiles in, you know, creating homes here? So again, we work as a team to really understand the past community, but also think about how present and future communities might use this space. And people have taken stones from the cabins over the time. They might, you know, build a and this is one of the things that can cause harm to a site, is people might want to build a fire if they're camping nearby and they find a stone. So they'll take it and go build a little ring for their evening fire. And that's harming the site. And we would, if you document the site, create a little bit of infrastructure, it actually can work to protect the cabins from further ruin. These sites are really significant when you think about the post-war American life. The war really impacted a lot about the United States, World War II. People changed their livelihoods because of the war. And adaptations to life after the war is really important to document. So when we think about 1946 to 1969, again, Scott is not in history books. He's not in documented as this great architect in the United States, but his skills and the built environment he created is worth documenting, because we can look at local adaptation and tradition and knowledge and expression of Alabama culture in a post-war environment through Lake Jogloma. And I think that's something really special to document and share with communities and children and the next generation for as long as we can. So while the house is in ruins, we can still learn a lot about past communities by bringing all these different lines of evidence together to understand what people were doing, and then how we can share this into the future. So this site is, Scott really created a unique recreational site in the mid-20th century, and it really captures a story in post-war America that isn't told all that often in our history books. When you learn about Alabama history, and I think it's 4th grade, we don't learn about these small stories like this. But if we document this and document Lake Jogloma, share his story and what Scott did, it's going to be a really unique addition to what we already know about Talladega County. And another aspect to this is the U.S. Forest Service works to create recreation sites for today. And they were doing this in the past too. And in 1971, we have a quote from them saying, water-oriented recreation sites in the area are just not present. There are very few of them. So Lake Jogloma is special in that regard too. And the U.S. Forest Service was planning to for the property to be a development that could be a recreation area for more of the population to use. So when we think about how can we preserve this area and this recreation site from the mid-20th century for future generations, well, one way is to document the past, but then also allow the next generation to experience it in the way that it was intended, as a nature facility, as a place for camping and picnicking and running and hiking along the Pinhoti. So I think it's a really unique aspect of Alabama history that I'm really happy that I make part of this team to document the site and work forward to create more information about the site. And so that is it from me, and I'm more than happy to answer questions that people may have.
Wow, thank you, Katie. That was great. That's really interesting stuff. If anybody has questions, now is a great time to throw them into the chat, and we'd like to, obviously answer any questions we possibly can, and share more information about the Jogloma-Scott Lake. And if you happen to know more about Jogloma-Scott Lake, then we'd also love to know that information, because the more we can document it, the better, because it's a really fascinating piece of history and culture from Alabama. So I'm guessing either everybody's really shy, or you just did such a great job of explaining everything that they do not have any questions. Oh, here comes something. Jeff Hayes posts not so much a question as much as an observation. I'm impressed that the U.S. Forest Service called for an accessible place for the handicapped in 1971. I did not know that, and that's a personal thing that's very interesting to me, and I'm really excited about that. So if you have any more details about that, Katie?
I don't have a lot of details about that, but one thing I think I'm glad you brought this up, Jeff, is it's interesting to see these broader movements in North America and in the United States brought down to a local level. And we didn't really have a lot of considerations for people with various abilities in the 70s. So it's nice to see that we were a little forward thinking in Alabama through the Forest Service to think about how can we get as many people of various abilities down to the forest. So yeah, I wish I had more details about that, but I think it's fantastic.
It's very prescient, especially since ADA, which has been around for what seems like a really long time, is actually a really pretty new concept. So yay, Forest Service. Cheers. Anybody else have any questions? Sandy, do you have anything you'd like to throw in, or? I guess the next step will be you going out, Katie, and doing some more in-person site surveying. And oh, let's see. Cindy's having a little trouble unmuting, I think. So I'm going to work on seeing if I can make that work.
Well, I'm here. You're just controlling my ability to talk. So somebody is always good when somebody does that. So thank you. No, I appreciate Katie sharing this. The next steps are, yes, she needs to do some more field work and get some reports into the Alabama Historical Commission to document the site. There's a review process. Yes, we're excited to have Katie on the team and to get this final piece of the documentation in place. So we've had a couple meetings out on site with people and feel like we're just needing the due diligence and things will move forward. So I see a question. Yes, this is recorded and the video will be posted. Sorry, some folks, this is kind of the dinner hour. So hate it if some folks miss, but you'll have another opportunity to see it via our website or our YouTube. So good there. Any other questions?
We'll get this out.
Yes.
We'll get the video out in the next day or so, and everybody that signed up for the webinar will get a link to it. If in the meantime you do have any questions, or after you watch the video again, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us. You can email us or use the contact form on the Alabama Trails Foundation website. Oh, Jerry asked a question. What has been your favorite part about researching the lake?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jerry. So as a person new to Alabama, it's been a wonderful introduction to local recreation sites. What Scott, I didn't realize that, finding out where people would spend their weekends has been great to see. Okay, in Talladega, you're so close to just go over to Scott Lake, and I love finding those little stories of how people spend their free time. And so it's been really wonderful to see these different, and you then connect the dots, right? You see, okay, well, they had friends in Bessemer. Okay, so we have these little communities coming together at Scott Lake. And I think it's I love those small stories that just add such a richness to the past.
Couple other things to share. One of the grandchildren of Mr. Scott is still alive and very interested in this project, as are a couple family friends that used to come to the lake and recreate with the family there. So that's been super interesting to find those people are there and learn about their experiences. And for those who may not have any maybe new to our webinars and to the Trails Foundation outreach process, we did a webinar about a year ago with the landscape architects, And that video or webinar is posted on our website as well. And that kind of gives you the basic framework of what our proposal is, a bridge crossing, a boardwalk, some realignment of the trail, as Katie said, to protect the structures that Mr. Scott left behind. I think we had one more question in there, Joe, about Native American history, and I'll let Katie respond to that. We have done a little bit of exploration there, but Katie probably knows more about what was left in the records.
Yeah, so there has been a little bit, and close to Lake Jogloma is a lithic scatter, so stone tool scatter. And we could go back and document which Native American groups lived where. We just don't have a lot of evidence right here through the archaeological record of evidence of what kind of habitats and how they were using the landscape besides the lithic scatter. But so, and let's see more about shovel tests conducted around the cabins. When we do shovel tests, so we have some information about Native Americans, but we're focusing more, we don't have that much evidence, and we've been focusing more because of the shovel test and what the material culture says on the more recent past. But the documentation of which groups lived where is in the record, is in the historical record. I just don't have it on the top of my head. But I can, if you email me, I'll put my email in the chat. I would be more than happy to share more information about that with you and show you some resources. The shovel tests that come up negative, we did shovel tests around different areas that were negative. And shovel tests come up negative for a lot of different reasons. Sometimes it's because the site's just been, there's just nothing, there wasn't anything in that particular shovel test, but we do systematic shovel tests. We look at high probability areas to check for evidence of human occupation and evidence of human use of sites. The shovel, when we already have a cabin, we already know that there's evidence of human occupation there. Doing more excavations around the cabin would be a much larger project and take a much larger amount of time and resources. And as I mentioned earlier, we don't want to excavate everything, because then we're destroying aspects of the past, because archaeology excavation is a destructive analysis and a destructive type of testing. So it's nice to keep that safe and not disrupt the ground near those cabins, because we don't want to shift any of the architectural features by moving soil close to it, unless it's necessary. So, that's why we specifically put shovel tests in certain places to keep archaeology safe and keep the standing architecture safe, but then also testing for high probability of where there might have been more archaeology, more evidence of human activity in the area.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Katie. And thank you to everybody that came. If anybody has a last moment question, now is a great time. But I think Katie has also shared her email. So I think if you come up with a question 2 minutes after we end the presentation, shoot her an email, and I'm sure she'll have a brilliant answer for you. So it's been great. Thank y'all all for all the questions, and thank you for being here, and thank you for taking time to learn more about the Jogloma-Scott Lake project. I find it really fascinating. I'm also really interested, as Jeff Hayes mentioned, learning more about the Native American history there. But also, I really enjoyed learning that the Forest Service was so forethought in terms of doing something with accessibility. So thank you again. Thank you, Katie, and thank you to everybody. Y'all have a wonderful night.